You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik.
Welcome to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. I'm your host, Erik Johnson, joined again by my dear friend Josh Mead, who is in Senegal, West Africa today. And this is part two of a questionnaire that we are going through that was recently given to me by one of a young man in Bible college who is desiring to be a missionary and giving one of those missionary interviews. Josh, I think with missionary interviews, I'm getting a lot of these days. I'm thinking it has a lot to do with being old and having gray hair. What do you think?
Yeah, that might have something to do with it because I'm not getting that many. So,
Man.
yeah,
Oh,
I'm
man,
not
I can
quite
sure
your
that's
age
what it
yet.
is. That's true. That's true. Well, I tell you what, if you haven't listened to the first part, go back and listen to the first number of questions. But we're going to continue on a little bit of a rapid fire form here. But we're going to continue these great questions about missions. And the first one today is actually a really good one to consider, Josh. It says, what concerns you most about the way we do missionary work today? Very thought-provoking.
I would say the most thought I put into, I think there's two things, right? Number one, it's going to be the way we raise funds and have to, the travel. I love the way we do it. I love presenting in churches, the ministry. You have to raise by faith. It's there's pros and cons, and I think we've had episodes in the past talking about the pros and cons of the way that our churches do deputation. I think the pros far outweigh the cons, but I think with any structure, you can always improve upon it. And in fact, in between the recording of these sessions, I was scrolling on Facebook on a ministry group I'm in, and the first post to pop up was an appeal to establish regional mission conferences so missionaries don't have to travel as far. And I would say that's a great solution to the problem of needing to travel so much. I would say this right now, the way it's structured is if you want to raise support quickly, then you have to be able to travel long distances on short amounts of time. You got to be willing to be, I think, like Florida one day, Michigan the next. So it could be a little tougher, especially if you have a family. Some mission boards are saying it's taken 3 to 5 years. Still we're etching toward that 5-year mark to raise support. Depends on the field you go to. There's a lot of factors into it. So I think that other missions do regional mission conferences, and they structure it to where the missionary just visits churches in their regions. And so we're not a denomination as Independent Baptists. We're loosely connected to other independent churches. And so we have a strong missions program, our churches do, but there's a little more legwork that has to go in for the individual missionary to raise support. So I'd say that would be one thing that concerns me, that discourages young men thinking about going into missions. And I've had people tell me that I don't know if I want to spend 5 years trying to raise support. In fact, I just had a conversation with a gentleman who's retirement age, and he said, I don't want to spend 5 years because I need to get to the field, And so, it's that would be that. On the field, I think there could be a better approach to missions in cultivating actual teamwork, not just talking about it, but cultivating from the ground up a team structure with expectations going into it. And that would have to be at a mission level. There's a lot of conflict, Erik, out there with missionaries among missionaries, unfortunately. And we kind of, as Independent Baptists, go into a field thinking we're the only gospel preaching church in town. And I'm not saying you need to connect with churches that are not of like doctrine,
Right.
but at least you should be able to get along with another Independent Baptist who's starting a church in your area to learn how to work as a team. So I would say those two areas.
Well, that's very good. I hadn't really considered the deputation side, and just recently I actually did a little bit of analysis of the average supporting church by dollar amount, and I kind of had in my mind anecdotally that was going to be more than it is. It's still pretty close to $100 a
Hmm.
month, maybe
And
a tick above.
that's what it
And I
was when
thought
we
in
raised support, right? Like,
well, it must have been a slightly under that, and I would just
right.
had an assumption because it has gone up. A lot of churches have given more, and I haven't got a lot of churches at 25 and 50 since then.
That's true.
But the truth of the matter is, just the math is this: if you have to raise $7,000, which is pretty minimum for missionaries, and you have to raise you're getting $100 per church, that's 70 churches. And if you are one of the best missionaries and you're getting every two churches to support you, one out of every two, that's 150 churches. And if you can get into, 100 churches in a year, that's great. So it means you have to go to 150 churches. That's going to take you every bit of 2 years at the best ratio.
Hmm.
And so Josh is right. There's a lot of things to consider. I think churches that support closer to 200, 250 a month would be maybe not the greatest difference, like going from having 100 missionaries to say 75 missionaries. So I know mission churches want to support more churches. I mean, more missionaries. That's
Yes.
great. But if you can make that slight adjustment, I think you could cut years off of the missionary journey for deputation. I think there is a little bit of a survival of the fittest. I think those who aren't really quite up to the difficult task of deputation, which it's not exactly like going to mission field, but it's a difficult task.
Sure.
It's kind of like language, like people who say, I don't really want to go learn another language. Well, it's like, well, they're not going to have any impact anywhere in the world. Like there's some difficult things you have to do. And now, Josh, man, I don't know if you know this, but next December, it's going to be 20 years
Hmm.
from when you and I met. And deputation was a long time ago. I don't remember much of it,
Yeah.
and so we spent the majority. And so if you have a long range focus, I'm going to be a missionary for 20 to 30 years,
Yes.
and I work really hard at it. I could probably get this thing knocked down in just at about 2 years, maybe a little bit more.
Hmm.
And I'm going to dedicate a year of language. Well, when you look back at 20, 25 years, those 3 years, which were very important because nowadays, Josh, I'm sure you have such a great connections with those pastors you met 20 years ago, people who prayed for you. It is a necessary evil. But Josh brings up a good point. So I only got a little bit of tangent there. But the thing I really do, probably personally on the mission field, that concerns me a little bit more is that we don't see we don't see on our mission field couples that come with a burden to go to a place where the gospel has not been reached, to maybe have that pioneering spirit, or maybe go with the team. I understand both, and to just plant a church and just see what the Lord does.
Hmm.
It's few and far between these days. It does happen, but when we were coming behind, that's what we were learning from the missionaries who have been before us 10, 15, 20 years, is that, you know, it's fine to come for a year or two, learn under somebody, but you should be looking out for a place, a city that hasn't heard the gospel or has next to no gospel witness, where you can go make an impact. I think that's what at its core missions is people finding places where the gospel has not been spread. And so there's a lot, and I'm not going to bust on any other kind of ministries, but I'm just going to say that concerns me. I think the majority of our mission work should be on couples that have a desire to reach places where the gospel hasn't gone yet. And so that when I hear about people going to do other things, I wish the majority of people I heard were doing what I believe missions work is.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's good.
Uh,
That's a good question.
yeah. All right. This is more specific and it can be brief, but I think it shows our heart. Do you have a burden for one particular place where you have not been able to do anything about that burden? A place maybe that needs the gospel, and describe the place and the need.
Yeah. When I was in college, we picked a country at random out of a hat, and that country, I probably won't say it online here, but it's a country that is close to the gospel, that is
Hmm.
very close to this country. And that was the country we picked. And when we realized, oh, you can't go there as a missionary openly, we saw this
Hmm.
country was nearby. And so we decided to come work here. And so I've always had a burden for that country. There is a moving of God right now, and we get updates from believers and those who are getting saved in that area. One of the things we haven't been able to, I haven't been able to go there yet to do active ministry, But I do like this question because it's a place I've always had a burden for. And the first place was Gambia, and I had a burden for there when we moved here to Senegal. And then God sent a missionary there, and a church is established. And so we stay closely connected with that church. And now this other country, just in the recent couple months, I've been in touch with some key leaders from this area where we're going to help them develop media to do evangelism online to encourage the churches that are being established among nationals in this country. They just need good training and encouragement. And so I like this question because I have this burden for this particular country, haven't been able to do anything about it. But in the coming year, I think God is starting to open the door. And we're also asking the Lord to open the door to be able to go up there and do a medical outreach with, not with Medical Mission Outreach. There's actually another organization that does a little more kind of a little more Navy SEAL. They go into countries where you can't really get into. And
Sneaky,
so, anyways,
sneaky.
yeah. So, anyways, that's that would be my answer.
So when I first heard this question, I was thinking more specifically regionally because
Sure.
I'm a regional pastor. And so there were a number of cities that came to mind. One in particular that just last week I had the opportunity, one of the young men that we're probably going to be sending out of our church actually feels a burden for the city.
Hmm.
And my director has actually been trying to send missionaries there for 10 years, and Lord just hasn't put the burden on people's hearts. So I'm very excited about that. There's a couple other little smaller cities within 30 minutes to an hour that I have great burdens for. So that those are specific places that nobody would know. But as you start talking about another country, one of the countries I've had a burden for since the moment I got here, and I would love for one day the Lord to send a Dominican out of our church, is the country of Cuba.
Hmm.
The doors have been opening slowly there. I do know lots of missionary friends who are able to go there for short-term trips. I do know some church planters there that are seeing great blessing, spiritual success. And so personally, I love it. And I've always prayed that those who grew up in this culture, though not completely the same, there are a lot of
Right.
similarities. I believe they would be able to adapt very well into Cuba. And so that's a country that I've just had a heart for because I know the persecution they've had to go through has actually made the churches flourish greatly. And I think one
Hmm.
day when freedom does completely reign there, there'll probably be a lot of apostasy and apathy that comes, and we need strong churches to continue there because that's generally what happens after we get more freedoms.
Yeah,
So
that's
great
true.
question there. Great question. Let's see. I'm going to skip over a few. I'll ask this. I think we probably mentioned this before, but besides your immediate family, who is your biggest help or helper in the work there in Senegal, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, Malik Job is the lead pastor of our church here, and we wouldn't be doing what we're doing without his assistance and help. And we're close like brothers, and we've been in the ministry together now. We've been working together for almost 10 years, and God has just used him incredibly to help me to grow and to understand the culture and to deal with cultural issues. And then the church is where it is with his partnership. And so I'm so grateful to have a partner in the ministry that that I can be that close. I recognize on a regular basis that not every missionary gets that privilege to have
Hmm.
somebody in the ministry who's a national, loves the Lord, especially in the context where we're at, okay,
Hmm.
where
Yeah.
there are so few believers from his ethnic group, and there's only about not even, I don't even think there's 10 pastors from his ethnic group in the entire country. And so it's just a blessing that I recognize to have him as a partner in the ministry for sure. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, for us, we've sent out church planters, and it's kind of like Acts chapter 13. You're sad you're sending out Barnabas and Saul,
Hmm.
but those who've stepped up, a gentleman named Francisco, who really does the bus route, does a lot of facilities management here. I'm lean on him for a lot of just physical help. A gentleman named Rafa. Um, and another gentleman named Ramon. And if you know these people who've come to visit and recognize those names because they're integral in the work here, they really have helped me in the last number of years free up a lot of my work on physical things so I can work on more spiritual ones.
Hmm.
But those gentlemen, one's in his late 50s, another two in their 70s. And I'm going to tell you, we need to replace these guys. And we got some guys that are learning underneath them, but man, I hope they keep going for a long time because they are just real great helpers. And, everyone takes their piece. Some are
Mhm.
song leaders, some are bus captains, some are just people who jump in there and help out. But man, they're just so helpful. And I'm so thankful
Excellent.
for them.
Excellent.
Real quick, I don't know exactly how this is for you every day, but how safe are you from bodily harm where you labor?
Uh, yeah, I've never had anybody, except for maybe once or twice, try to physically harm me. Um, did get into a little scuffle recently at our medical clinic, but that was a little chaotic. But I would say
Personalities.
the biggest thing that this living here in the desert is just it wears and tears your body physically. Um,
Hmm.
and so it just over time, the heat, it's been so hot lately. My wife keeps track of the temperature and everything on her weather app. And it's the first time since she's been tracking the weather that she saw on the list of temperatures that yesterday it wasn't just saying it was hot. There was an actual warning with like a flashing red light, like this
Mhm.
is dangerously hot today. And so it really just beats up your body. It wears it out. And we I'll share this. We ran the air conditioner this past 2 months quite a bit because we had a team here. We had a team from California, and we ran an air conditioner downstairs every day when they were in that main room. Because when you get 20 bodies in a room, in a smaller room, it's just going to heat up. And then we were running air conditioners a little more than normal, even during the daytime this past couple months. And I got my bill, and on average, during the hot season, it's usually about $300 a month on average. My bill for 2 months was $1,200. And so it was double. Uh, it's just how hot it's been. It's just been incredibly hot. Yeah.
Well, you don't want to hear that I just went and paid my power bill. And since I installed solar panels, Josh,
Ah, yes.
we paid $5.
Oh man. I gotta
So
get
that
them.
is a
Yeah.
blessing.
Our
That is
new,
a great blessing.
definitely, our new building, we're
Um,
definitely putting solar panels in. So
oh, that's we'll talk about that another day. But man,
excellent.
that's a game changer. Bodily harm. It's funny that you say that. Those who are listening won't appreciate that, but those who are watching, I keep in my office a
Nice.
baseball bat. We've never had any altercations. We live in the church is in a pretty middle class area. I don't stay here late at night. You always have to be smart. You have to have your wits about you.
Yeah.
But I see the biggest danger to my bodily harm is just driving with Dominican drivers. So that's something we don't really worry about too much. All right, real quick, we've talked a lot about deputation, but we'll keep this brief. Deputation has many blessings. Name at least one, Josh.
Again, I have to go back to the family, the time you get to spend with family. If it's just you and your wife, it's like a second honeymoon. You're traveling together, you're
Hmm.
connecting. My
Hmm.
wife and I did it right after pretty much we got married. 8 months, what was it? 8 months working at my home church, and then we hit the field or hit the trail. So yeah, just take advantage of the time you can spend with your family. Don't get too stressed out about the traveling. Learn to enjoy the small things and the big things you get to do. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Everyone has it different ways, but Josh and Julie are just like Holly and I. It was like a second honeymoon. In fact, we are actually planning, Josh, now a return to the Grand Canyon to show our kids. And the last time
Yeah.
and the only time I ever went to the Grand Canyon was with
Yeah.
Josh and Julie Mead. And
Yeah.
so those were great times. I also would say, real quickly, making friends in the ministry, those who pray for you, come and visit you. That is a great part of deputation that I would not trade for anything.
Excellent.
Uh, in your opinion, once again, we've talked about this in much more length, but in a short way, what is the best way to learn a language? And I think maybe they're talking about, where to do it.
I would say the best way to learn a language is like baptism. The best way to be baptized is total immersion, right? You don't want none of the
Hmm.
sprinkling. You want to be all in, all right? So, yeah, you just got to go all in. And that's not just
Yeah.
living in a context
Hmm.
where you're immersed in it, but I mean in your own personal life, decide that, hey, I'm going to just read my Bible in the language for the next year, until I get the language down, and just you don't have to. Now, we didn't go so far as where I was just talking French, speaking French to my wife.
Hmm.
We kept it English, But yeah, I put my English Bible away and just went totally with French and then did the same thing when we came here for Wolof. So anyways, yeah, you just got to get totally immersed and be committed.
Totally agree. I mean, that was our experience. Though we didn't go to our home country, went to another country in Costa Rica.
Hmm.
But do your research. But my advice, and it's always been, if you can go to a reputable language school in a country that speaks that language, even if it's not your final destination, I actually kind of encourage if it cannot be your final destination, there's some advantages to that as
Hmm.
well. But like Josh mentions, I just remember this anecdotally. We went to a very large language institute, and it was always so surprising to me that the students, after a week of learning Spanish, went to this English Bible study in this English church. And I just thought, that's
Yeah,
nuts. Like, you're gonna be. And so we went and visited all the independent Baptist missionaries in the churches just to get ideas how to learn things.
certainly.
And I think that immersion is always the best way to go. All
Yeah.
right, Josh, this is a large question, but maybe one we can succinctly respond to. What are some goals for you for the next 2 years?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, my goal is to complete our complete our building projects, specifically to have the administrative building constructed, which will also be a place where our church can meet until we put a larger building up. We'll have a larger studio, things like that. And then
Wow.
constructing a basketball court and then in the next years, we'd like to implement a sport outreach. I've got some guys that I'm bringing in that we're training to do sport outreach, continue to cultivate our media church, both our church. All of this falls under the umbrella of our church planning ministry, which is eventually going to turn into us traveling throughout the country, assisting church plants, bringing them up to this area, training guys, sending them out. And so continuing to develop the media ministry. And my biggest goal in the next 2 years is to train a solid staff to support Malik in the work here to where I can be more flexible and be comfortable with people having a great staff that's running the ministry here so that I can be available to travel more to places like Gambia, um, do seminars in different areas, train church planners, maybe spend 2 weeks with a guy that we're sending to start a church in this town, and so that's kind of where we're at right now. Yeah.
I kind of have three. They're smaller to bigger. Number one is to continue to develop our seminary. We're seeing great
Hmm.
response to that. The men from all three churches responding to it. And so kind of pointing that forward, getting those things hashed out, getting curriculums set, and just seeing that growth. Secondly, is be involved in another church plant. We have a city and a person picked out. Now we're just working on some of the details of that, and that takes time, effort, a lot of prayer, a lot of work. There's nothing more exciting than that. I love seeing new churches planted with families who are going after, especially cities where really this city is basically untouched with the gospel, and so we're
Mm.
very excited about that. And then thirdly, a little larger, I've laid it out there kind of like a fleece like Gideon. We're willing to build a more of a legacy project as far as like a camp ministry, evangelistic outreach, sports ministry, and we've got some properties in mind we're praying about, and just seeing if the Lord's going to respond in that area as far as the obtaining of that property. So there's some big things we're working on, praying about, and we'll see how the Lord works. This next question doesn't even apply. It says, how technologically challenged are you? Josh is not technology challenged at all. I have some challenges, but I think we're pretty good in that area.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next one. This is a good one. When you think of all the missionaries you have ever known, who is one that stands out the most? Now, you spoke about Brother Bragg. Maybe there's another one that kind of comes to mind.
Do you have somebody on mind right away? I might answer it after you.
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting. I developed this, or I was thinking about this one, and a lot of the ones that had the biggest impact on my life weren't actually missionaries that long.
Okay.
For instance, Don Sisk has
Yeah.
had a tremendous impact in my life, and I think he was a missionary maybe a little over 10 years. It wasn't a tremendously long period of time that he was in Japan, but he's had as much impact in my life through his messages, through his mentorship, through his testimony than just about anybody. And then Brother Chris Phillips is another one personally for me who was a missionary here when I
Yeah.
was a young man considering to be a missionary. We actually never were on the island at the same time, but he, as his family, has come back to minister with us on the ground here, but also through mentorship. And now he's gone to a different part of his life where he's actually doing specific counseling for helping missionaries, national pastors, American pastors, families. So those two people, to me, weren't actually missionaries for long periods of time, but have been involved in missions and probably had the greatest impact in my life. How about you?
Yeah, I think of all the missionaries that I've known, there's a few that stand out. There's first one would be Daryl Champlin, who
Hmm.
was a old time missionary. He worked in both, I think it was the Congo and Suriname. He has family, kids who are still missionaries. He passed away years ago. But
Hmm.
when I was a teenager, somebody gave me a cassette tape of his, called one of his messages called Afraid of What? And it was probably the most impactful message. And I probably listened to that message more than any other message that I listened to over the course of the
Wow.
years that really shaped my passion and philosophy of picking where we would go, what kind of attitude we should have going into missions, having a pioneer spirit and all of that. And so I did get to meet him. I think it was our second furlough as we're traveling. I got to meet him in person. And our church in Fostoria actually hosted him. He came in and he had all the men in the church just gathered around after the service talking about an elephant he had to hunt down that was terrorizing his village and ended up like landing between this elephant's legs and shooting it and because it was anyways incredible stories that this guy has, and if he has a few messages online you could find, he's definitely worth looking up. So just one of those old
Mm.
school missionaries you read about and
Yeah,
that was still alive during my generation. And we still got a few living legends, that aren't that, like, Brother Godfrey's not that old, but he's one of those living legends that the guy speaks multiple languages. It's just incredible, and he's got a heart to reach so many people and has impacted so many nations for the gospel.
hmm.
So yeah, men like that stand out for me in the work missions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a great one. This is probably a real quick one, and I think this probably is written in a way where it can have a little more clarity, but it says to you, what is one of the most beautiful places in the world? I think they're kind of specifically talking about your experience on the mission field. So maybe a
Sure.
beautiful place you've seen on the mission field.
So is this like a romanticized, like the most
I
beautiful
don't
place in the
know.
world is when I'm gathered
Maybe
around
it's
the
like your
table with my
home. I don't
family?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say obviously, on the aesthetically, there's not a lot
Hmm.
in my country that, the desert can be
That stinks.
beautiful. So if you get out to the desert, there's places in the desert where it can be nice, it's calm, it's quiet.
Hmm.
So aesthetically, there's a few places we enjoy here. My wife loves waterfalls, and so we've been able to, when we're in the States, we try to stop and Hawking Hills, I think I pronounced that right, in Ohio is a beautiful place to go and hike. But just a beautiful place, in the world for me is just being with family and gathered around in the evenings, having a meal together and spending time. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that we've been very privileged because of our proximity to some nice vacation places on the shores, that where we can usually with an Airbnb get a pretty very reasonable price.
right.
And to me, those are the most beautiful places. And they aren't necessarily just because they're near the ocean, although that is something we do love. And we also get to go to the mountains and see waterfalls, which is very beautiful. But I think it really is, just who you're spending the time with. And so if you're in a great location with your family, that's as good as it gets. And I think that is probably the most beautiful place in the world. Now we sound a little sappy, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Um, all right. This one we can probably skip over. This is more of an individual. Person asked about what you do with your life. Well, give it to the Lord and go be a missionary. Is there any
that's
other
it.
question than that? That's
Yeah,
it. All right.
that's it.
God, like Don Sis said, if you got it wrong, God will forgive you, you know. All right. This is what are your people? That is the people closest to your heart. I guess if it's not your family, I mean, let's hope it's your family. But are there other people you rely on, Josh, that maybe that aren't your family that you say like that's one of my guys. That's someone I rely on besides
Well,
me.
is it exactly? Or is this question, the way I took this question was more like, is there an ethnic group or a nationality
Oh,
that is
okay.
like
All
the
right. That's
people
probably
of your heart?
true.
Because that's how I
Yeah,
answered
that's
it
probably
is
true.
I would say just the people of Senegal, I think is
Hmm.
obviously Muslims in general. Um,
Hmm.
I've I've always had a heart ever since we began ministry here to reach Muslims, and I've been glad to see more concern by American Christians to reach Muslims with the gospel instead of just
Yeah.
writing them off as
Yeah.
hopeless as
Hmm.
as many American Christians have in the past. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to see that, and I would say, the people of Senegal. I love this country. I was just talking with somebody the other day about what I love about Senegal, a Senegalese friend here. And I was just saying what I love about Senegal is that they have a sense of humor that they don't take life too seriously, but their sense of humor is very unique. Other people don't, other Africans even don't understand kind of the sense of humor, but the Senegalese love to just laugh about life. And I love the sense of humor here. And I think that's why I kind of fit in and I've been embraced by the people here because I've
Down to
embraced that
Tuba.
humor as well. Yeah, exactly. And so, um, yeah, I would say this country, the people in my heart. And then, you know, stateside, I just have a heart for other missionaries, especially young missionaries. When I see somebody raising
Hmm.
support with a family, man, I have a heart. That's part of why we do this podcast, I think. We want to see a
Hmm.
generation rise up who's going to be in it for the long haul and reach the world with the gospel. And so those are my
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
I I think understand this question probably better now that you explained it, which is good. I would definitely say probably, Hispanics, Latin American, we love going back to America and trying different cuisines, not just Dominican. We love going to Spanish speaking churches and meeting different people from different parts of the country, world, where you can speak the same language.
Yeah.
Um, it's always funny when I walk into a 7-Eleven somewhere near DC and I start talking to someone in Spanish and they look back and like, I'm from Ethiopia. I don't speak Spanish. I'm like, oh, sorry. I assume that's a wrong assumption. I apologize. So, yeah, I'd say Spanish speaking people are definitely our people. All right, Josh, let's kind of, a few minutes left here.
Yeah.
Let's finish up on this one. Last two, really. The last one will be a little quicker, but this one, what encourages you today about missions?
I'm encouraged by, I would say this. I hear a lot of maybe older missionaries and others saying, this generation, they don't know how to do anything and they can't, change tires and this and that. And maybe part of that's true, but I think the skill set that young people have going into missions today, there's a couple things. One, they want to work as a team. I don't think the younger generation that's coming into missions has an agenda. And I'm not saying the
Yeah.
older guys did, but there was less, while they pioneer works, a lot of these
Hmm.
older generations pioneered the work on their own. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing there's a paradigm shift, I think, in missions right now, and it's been taking place over the past few years is a stronger partnership with the national church and national leadership, with the missionary not taking the lead all the time. And I think a younger generation is going to bring about a stronger cohesiveness in cultivating national leadership and partnering with them. And then even just working with each other, that desire to collaborate and work together, I think is going to be a strength for missions moving forward. And they're good quality men. I'm seeing men and women surrendering that they're brilliant. They have skills that maybe they're not mechanics. I'm not a mechanic. I can't, do certain things, but there's certain skill sets that are going to be far more effective today. Maybe they can't survive out in the jungle on their own like the old generation could have, but that's not, maybe God's calling them to an urban area and they're going to use
Hmm.
media to reach millions and millions of people with the gospel. And so I'm excited. That encourages me. I get encouraged when I meet the young people going into missions because they're passionate and they're driven. And I think they kind of have an idea. They know what they want to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing encourages me. mentioned this a little bit recently. I've just been able to be in contact with younger men who are interested in missions, probably mostly due to our podcast. And I think it's just always exciting to see young men willing to set aside the desires of the world, the shiny things of this world to go after the things of God. And so, I think that's one of the reasons we've started this podcast to encourage guys that, if you have that desire in your heart, God's going to put you right where you fit as that piece of the puzzle. So don't spend your life worrying about, where it's going to be. God's going to direct your steps. If you're faithful, you're going forward, he's going to direct those steps. And so for me, I'm still just very encouraged to see young families going towards that. I do wish it was more. I think the emphasis needs to be from the pulpits more to consider. I know my life, it wasn't until I got to a church where they really emphasized that I really did consider it. And I think, we don't have to push, but you do need to put that out there as a pastor. Hey, you should be considering what the Lord have you to do, not only here in America, but maybe on the other side of the world. So that encourages me.
Absolutely.
All right, Josh, well, let's wrap this up. And what is one major thing you'd really like to do with your life? I had struggled with this, and so I kind of had a few, but I think I finally kind of got this down. What do you think?
Well, mine is this. One major thing I want to do, and I'm going to do it, is to visit the Dominican Republic and
stole
visit
mine. You stole mine. I was the favorite person.
and visit some of the greatest missionaries I know, the Johnson family. I would love to go with my whole family, but at least my wife and I, we want to get there. We want to get there someday. Yeah.
Man. Well, my first one was a spiritual one, which was, and this is true, and I'm sure you reiterated this one, is I do want to finish well. Like that's what I want to do the most in my life. And the more older I get, I realize that's the number one thing. And then number two, seeing my kids do well. But I was gonna say, like, I hadn't thought of like what's one. And as we were talking, I said, I want to go visit Josh in Senegal because all the history of all our friends, and then that he's there. So maybe we will in the next couple of years get to have these live podcasts in each other's offices.
It's got to get done.
Well,
it's got to get done.
I really want to thank this young man for sending these questions to us. Hopefully his missions professor will listen to this podcast and he'll get some extra points. And, reach out with questions. This is exactly what we like to talk about. We like to encourage people with our experiences, our observations. We don't think for a minute we have it all figured out. But we have seen some things, and we hope that the next generation is looking forward to serving the Lord. And Josh, anything else to add?
No, that's it. I love getting these questions as well, and I'm really excited about the next generation of missionaries. But you're right. If you're a pastor out there listening, there needs to be an emphasis from the pulpit on missions and surrendering your life to the mission field, because I think this generation has a lot to offer to the Lord. And like I said, I'd love to visit the Dominican Republic one day, but anybody needs to visit the Dominican. If you have a chance, go visit Brother Johnson. Come visit us in Senegal. The door's wide open, because if you can just see the work on the field, I think your heart will be touched, and God can use that to call you maybe into something you might not expect. And so, continue praying for laborers. That's the biggest thing the Lord told us to do. Continue to pray for laborers as we continue to fulfill his work. Well, Erik, I've enjoyed this conversation with these questions and look forward to maybe in the future answering more. But if there's any other topics or themes our listeners would like us to talk about, feel free to write in and let us know. Well, be sure to subscribe or like or share whatever platform you're on, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, or whether it's a podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify. Leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. That helps us in the ratings to get the word out. And maybe this will be a blessing to somebody who doesn't even know this podcast exists. My last furlough, Erik, people said, I didn't even know you do a podcast, several people. And they jumped on and started listening, and they've been enjoying it. And so, be sure to share this with a friend. So this is Josh from Senegal, West Africa.
Erik from the sunny DR.
God bless and have a great week. All right, very good.